Welcome to the Abundance Hack Show, where we are inspiring you to ditch the outdated beliefs, release the blocks, and fully embrace your sovereignty so you can confidently expand to allow more love, joy, and aligned success in your life. I am Niajae, your conscious accountability partner, reminding you that abundance is your birthright. Hey M&Ms, thank you for tuning into the Abundance Hack Show. What are you manifesting in your life today? I am so excited about today's guest. We have Alexandra Stockwell, who is the author of Uncompromising Intimacy, and I'm so excited to dive into this topic. But before we get into who she is and about this amazing book, Alexandra, what does abundance mean to you?
Abundance means the feeling of satisfaction and expansion and confidence and knowing that the next thing coming is going to be fantastic.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Not many people say confidence, and I think that's a huge, huge thing. I really love that you said that. So, Alexandra and I actually met at a podcast like seminar convention, I'm not sure what you call it, but we had an amazing conversation about relationships and conscious relationships, and I'm excited to dive in. But before we dive into all of the juicy topics, tell the audience about you. Who is Alexandra Stockwell?
Thank you. I am a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert. I practiced family medicine for about 10 years. I've been married for 24 years and I have 4 children. And I got into coaching. I've trained about 1,000 coaches. And what I do now, pretty much full time, is serve couples, particularly couples who are committed to one another. They love one another, but they want so much more for their relationship. And so I show them how to have emotional intimacy and sensual passion for the rest of their lives.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I honestly feel like it's something that is so important and so needed because I have a lot of friends that are older than I am and they've reached a point in their relationship where they're just like, okay, him again, her again. They love each other. They don't want to leave. They don't like they're committed, but they've lost that fire and that passion and that excitement. And I try to tell them like there's another level, like rekindle that flame. And I feel like to me they're like, girl, you're not even married. Like you don't understand what it's like after 20 years or 16 years. So I'm really excited for you to just break down like your philosophies. But before we get into that, what made you want to go in a direction of relationships?
It's a good question. And people often say, oh, how'd you make that change? And it was a very indirect, meandering route. And I definitely didn't know where I was going to end up. And in fact, I I had a lot of different things happen in my mid-30s. I already had 3 of my 4 children. My husband and I were married. I had paid off my student loans for medical school. I had my own practice. I loved practicing medicine, and I anticipated being on that path for many more decades. I thought, okay, this is what I've been working for. I've arrived. Now I get to enjoy it. And I did enjoy it. There wasn't some major crisis. I don't have any dramatic story. Other people in my life didn't really know what was happening. But inside, I didn't feel abundant, I'll say here. I felt like I had arrived, but I didn't feel as satisfied as I had anticipated. And I guess I will add also that around that time, both my father and then my mother died, and I became the oldest person in my family in my mid 30s. And I never expected that because the previous generations were long lived. And I think all of that, just everything that I've just shared, conspired to have me feel a lot less certain about what was ahead. And I dared to listen to that whisper before waiting for some crazy, intense thing. I listened to the whisper and I ended up taking a sabbatical from medicine. I knew I wouldn't go back, but I didn't have the courage to tell anyone except my husband that was the case. And I went on a whole journey to really discover what was fulfilling. And I did a lot of different personal growth and spiritual trainings and dance training, different things. And eventually, really to my utter surprise, because this wasn't how I moved through the world, but I ended up taking this incredible training in sensuality and sexuality for my own purposes, kind of like the friends you've just described. And it happened to also be a coach training. And at the time, I didn't know what coaching was. It was less popular then. And I took the letters after my name seriously and always preferred to go to licensed people. And um, I went to the lab just to see what it was all about. And I realized this is for me. So I got into serving relationships, drawing on my medical background and now a lot of experience coaching other couples. But really, I got into it in pursuit of my own delight and finding answers to questions for my own marriage.
I love that. And would you say that doing that training helped? Like how did it affect your marriage after something like that?
It was a very profound impact, but it's not simple enough to say that it was the training because I I live in the suburbs. I've been married for 24 years. As I said, I have 4 children. I live what has always looked from the outside like a fairly conventional bourgeois life. But when I was exploring and really gave my permission to like turn over every stone, I ended up in all kinds of very edgy, risque situations there where there really was nobody like me. It was
Mm.
people who were young and exploring, polyamorous, newly divorced, uh, kinks, fetishes, all kinds of different kind of fringe behavior for, I mean, in that context, it doesn't feel fringy at all. It feels normal. But in terms of the rest of society, it was kind of fringe activities. And so I learned so much doing that. And I really learned to be accepting of every flavor of sexuality. It was a very deep, important part of my education as a human. But I took all of that and translated it into my very suburban bedroom and suburban life. And so, yes, that training really served me in my marriage, but it served me because I took it and made it relevant, drawing also on my scientific background and so forth. And whereas the people that I was in the training with were learning all kinds of sophisticated erotic skills, for me, I wanted to know how to be really turned on while I cooked and served dinner to my family. I
Mm.
wanted to make the transition from looking at my husband as a wonderful co parent to the very sexy, attractive man he is, and moving through my home in a way that felt nurturing and honoring of the family life I wanted to create, while also very much bringing my womanly juice and provocative, passionate soul. And so I learned in my training, but it's really in blending all of these different exposures and influences that I come to my approach with couples.
I love, love, love it. I love, love, love it. So tell us about your book. How did the book come about?
Well, clearly, in our society in general, we do not know how to have really great relationships that last and get better and better with time. And I think many people are familiar with the statistics around divorce: 50% of first marriages, 60% of second, 73% of third marriages. Although those statistics are a little bit outdated because the millennials are brilliantly changing that. They wait to get married and they're staying married longer when and if they marry. So, but those are the statistics for people certainly 40 and above. But really, I think the bigger concern for me is the state of couples who do stay together. And the
Mhm.
vast majority of couples have what I describe as the toleration relationship, which is using the most frequently given advice, which is that you have to learn to compromise. And if you want to have a good marriage, you have to master the art of compromise. And compromise is what makes it all work. And I think that is completely wrong.
Mm.
So, uncompromising intimacy is really built on the premise in my conviction that the way to have a great relationship is absolutely not to compromise, but to learn to bring all of yourself, all of who you are to the relationship. Learn to love yourself and accept all of who your partner is. And from there, create the juicy, collaborative, harmonious, sexy relationship. And so being uncompromising does not mean you get your way all the time, because that's not what relationship is about.
Mm-hmm.
But it does mean that you bring what you want and who you are fully into the relationship and don't compromise on yourself. And through that, the most amazing sparks can fly.
Mm. I love it. I love it. So, if you had to share with the audience one of your most important core principles, what would that be?
Well, I'll name all six and then I'll go into depth about one of them. So I think to really create a conscious partnership, there are
Ooh,
six.
so before, I don't mean to cut you off, but before you go into creating a conscious relationship, can you explain what your definition of a conscious relationship is?
Absolutely. So my definition of a conscious relationship, I usually say conscious partnership,
Mhm.
um, is a relationship where you bring all of yourself to the relationship, and your partner does too, and you learn to love and be loved for exactly who you are. And there are three aspects to my definition of conscious partnership. So that's the first one. The second one is that both people use the relationship as a vehicle for personal transformation. So
Mhm.
this is totally aligned with the things that you said on your conscious relationship podcast. And in a conscious partnership, you're not looking for the other person to change. You're looking for what arises that's an invitation for your own transformation. And then the third part of my definition of conscious partnership is that it is a relationship where no matter what arises, whether it's blissful ecstasy or sorrow or incredible challenges, whatever arises in the relationship, in a conscious partnership, you use all of that to create more connection.
Mm, I love it. I love it. All
So
right.
the
So,
ways
yeah.
to do that, the six essential qualities, I'll rattle them off and then go into more depth. So the first is to cultivate curiosity.
Mm,
The second is embrace honesty, and I really distinguish between vulnerable honesty and brutal honesty.
mhm.
The third is be kind, choose happiness, take responsibility, and seek growth. I think you really emphasized in your podcast on the topic how a conscious partnership is a growth based relationship. And I 100% agree. It's the context for all of the rest of the qualities to really be embodied. I think cultivate curiosity is one of the most important things to highlight, because it's something that it's actually a small amount, it's a small investment of attention and energy, and the return is huge. Because if you think about what it's like to fall in love and all that wonderful aspect of relationship, typically at the beginning where both people are in love, it's filled with curiosity. You want to know what your beloved ate for lunch in kindergarten and their favorite song, and where do they want to go on vacation, and what dreams and aspirations, what were the hard challenges in life. Like, being in love, it's just filled with curiosity for that other person. And then life happens, other things get our attention, and one of the main things to suffer is the amount of curiosity we have towards our partner. And there's this crazy statistic that for for most couples in the United States with children, they spend less than 4 minutes per day discussing anything other than logistics and what the children need.
Mm,
And so anyone listening who wants more aliveness, more dynamic intimacy in partnership. And actually, this works in any kind of relationship, but it works very deeply in romantic partnership. I highly recommend asking open-ended questions. That is true as a disruptor for like the ho hum of daily life, to ask an open-ended question like, what are you passionate about today? Or
Mhm.
what was the most exciting part of your week? Or if you could change one thing about our lives, what would it be? I mean, really, any kind of open ended question will work to just disrupt the ho hum quality. And it
Mhm.
also is an amazing tool in conflict, because typically, when conflict is happening, there is a lack of curiosity. And if you can just take a breath and ask a question to your partner about whatever it is that matters in that moment, that will really change things. And the one thing that I really need to add, which is often missed, is that the easy part, not always easy, but the easier part in cultivating curiosity to enliven a relationship is in asking the question. And in a long term relationship, it is key that you are a yes to whatever the answer is. Because very often we ask our partners a question and then we might not like what their answer is. And if we make that known and express disappointment or criticism, they're not likely to answer us the next time we ask. So it doesn't mean you have to agree. Like if you ask your partner about a sexual fantasy he or she has never told you, you don't need to be into that sexual fantasy at all, but you need to be a yes to the fact that it was shared with you. So you could say something like, wow, I'm so glad you told me, which doesn't commit you to participating in that fantasy ever, but it is a yes to the fact that your partner actually opened up and shared something that hadn't been shared before.
Mm. I love that. I love that. That's one of the things that I talked about is holding space. So allowing them to talk without judgment. It's so important. So important. So it sounds like, and obviously I'm not married, but just from my perspective, people get in a very monotonous routine and sometimes it gets boring. So like creating that curiosity just spices things up a little bit, because you think after 20 years you just know a person automatically, and you know what they probably ate for lunch, you know what they're probably wanting to do, like you feel like you know all these things. So creating space, and people do change over time, so really really allowing that space to find out stuff you never knew, or find out something that may have changed, especially if they're both on some type of path of growth. Like, there's things that I like now that I didn't like 5 years ago, or vice versa. And so I really like that. I really like that asking open-ended questions to create that curiosity.
And there's something really amazing that happens. It's not just accessing new information, but if someone asks me a question that I've been asked, well, certainly as someone interviewed on podcasts, you might ask me a question that I've been asked before, but each time I'm asked, I end up accessing new things and I have new insights or a new way of saying something. And so, even asking familiar questions like, my husband and I were both 51, and retirement, which used to seem like miles away, it's not so far anymore. And so, we've talked many times about what we want to do when we get retired and what his dreams are. I don't actually plan to retire, but he does. And then, what dreams he has. And that's a conversation that we could continue to have on a regular basis. And it's still really enlivening. And I guess I want to say that cultivating curiosity and really getting to where you're sharing things that haven't been shared in the same way or have never been shared before really paves the way for a whole new depth of honesty. And when I work with clients, I don't start here because there needs to be rapport. And with couples who've been together a long time, this is very, very tender territory. But I have each person in the couple make a list of things that they have not shared with their partner. And that's going to include like some super benign things like I had a donut on my way home from work, and it may also include I had an affair 10 years ago. Like it can, or am having an affair currently. There's a, or I gave our son money when we had agreed we wouldn't. Like there are just so many different things, some of which are totally unimportant. You just didn't, you kind of just avoided saying, and other things that are really a big deal. And I have found this is very counterintuitive, but when sex is kind of cooled down and infrequent or dissatisfying, often one of the ways to change it, this is not with one night stands or new relationships, this is with long term relationships, that invariably one or both people are not sharing something that needs to be shared.
Mm.
And when someone is holding something back, and so not having an open exchange, an open channel of energy, it doesn't mean you have to tell everything. But if I'm particularly holding something back in life, it's not really possible in the bedroom to flip some switch and then be available for complete openness and exchange. And I was very surprised when I learned this when I started coaching couples. And I found that about 80% of the time when couples work with me, because things are frustrating in one way or another in terms of the bedroom, when I would teach them how to communicate and how to actually set things up to share vulnerably without attacking and make it safe to share at a much deeper level. And then I would turn to, okay, we've established good rapport, now we can address what's happening in the bedroom more directly. And again, 80% of the time they'd smile and say, oh no, we've got that handled. Just learning to tell the truth more deeply
Mm.
opened up all kinds of erotic energy.
Mm. That's powerful. If you were looking for a sign, here it is. This is your reminder to not settle, to know your worth, and to follow your bliss. This is a reminder to maintain alignment and show up in your fullest expression. Abundant and Aligned Society is an accountability program to remind you that you are a powerful being and you deserve to live the life you truly desire. Go to niajae.com/society to join in on the magic, because life is meant to be abundant.
For me personally, if my husband and I have a bit of a lull in the frequency of our sex, we don't have a lull in the quality. That is years ago gone. But we do have a lull in the frequency sometimes. And if it's not because one or the other of us is working late or there's some logistical situation, I'll ask myself, is there something that I haven't been saying?
Mm.
And it's not that I'm having an affair or something major. It's usually something minor, like I didn't like how something happened, or I don't know what, and I'll tell him, and then we're good to go. And this sounds so, I think for someone who hasn't actually experienced it, if you're listening and things are not the greatest in your sex life and you've been married for 15, 20 years, this may sound like way too basic, but I challenge you to try it.
Mm. Do you have any tips for communication? So I know that communicating, especially if you're not someone that's used to communicating, can be challenging, or being vulnerable with their partner can be challenging. So do you have any tips for that?
I do. I have a three-part way of communicating, and I want to say first that I think it's really important to do it with basic, benign things so you can focus on the manner of communication. And only once you feel comfortable speaking this way, then you can move into things where the content is more confronting. So the first thing is to say to your partner, I have something vulnerable to share, or I have something important, whatever the case is. Are you available to hear it?
Mm.
And it's very important that the partner is free to say yes or no. Although, in the case of a long term relationship where both people are committed to growth, no is basically not yet. And I might say this to my husband when he gets home one day and he'll say, well, actually, I want to shower and have some dinner and then I'll be available. But I need to be okay with either yes or no as the answer. That's essential. And when people are starting to be more vulnerable and share more, sometimes they're so subtle. And it's really important to call attention to it and say, I have something important to say. Are you available to hear it? Partner says yes. And then the second thing is to share why it is that you want to tell. Because otherwise, your partner's listening and wondering if they're going to be blamed or attacked or something. And so it's really important to say why. And then I'll give an example when I'm done. And then the third thing is to say what the desired outcome is, because then you and your partner can collaborate on creating that outcome. So, for example, I might say to my husband, I have something important to say. It's vulnerable. Are you available to hear it? He says yes. And I'll say, I'm telling it to you because there's something that's really been on my mind and eating at me, and it makes it hard for me to feel really good about being intimate with you. And my desired outcome is that after I tell you, we can then have a fun time.
Mhm.
And then I'll say that when I got up this morning and there were dishes in the sink, I felt taken for granted and unloved. And I know you didn't mean any of those things when you didn't do the dishes last night, but I felt like I was unimportant for you and that if you really cared about me, you would have done them. And my desired outcome is that you realize the impact because I know you don't actually mean to do that to me. And think of that next time when you're going to be doing the dishes in the evening.
Mm.
And we've gone from my saying things that are bothering me and his feeling contracted, attacked, defensive, and then we end up disconnected to my sharing things. And then he's happy to hear it, happy to know my experience, and then we feel more connected. So that's an example of how whatever arises can be used for um, building more connection.
So I know that dishes are just an example, but what if someone feels like you have to pick and choose your battles? Like, is it really worth me bringing this up? I'll just do the dishes and move on with life, and like that's it. So like and I know the whole purpose is to express yourself so you can clear that space and that energy for the fun joyous things. But for someone who's just like no, you got to pick and choose your battles and that's not worth it, what would you say to them?
Well, if it's not important to you, then let it go.
Mm-hmm.
But if it actually is important to you and you're going to be developing resentment and thinking of it on a regular basis, and it's going to interfere with how attracted you feel to your partner, then it actually is more important than you're letting it be. And I think we're not always the best judge of what actually matters to us. Let me explain myself that there are things like the dishes that I used to think it's just the dishes and he didn't mean anything by it. Why would I even bring it up? And there are many times where I didn't. But I'm at the point now where I notice I need to do my own work. And if as a result of doing my own work, it doesn't bother me, great, then we're good to go. But there are times when sometimes doing my own work still leaves me with a little bit of funny feeling. And for that, it wasn't that I wanted him to do the dishes. That wasn't the point of that communication, actually. The point of that communication was that I wanted him to know the impact on me and how it felt, because that's a place where I can wall off my feelings or I can share how it played out. Because at the point at which I was telling him, I wasn't upset with him, it was more revealing what was going on in my inner world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So powerful. Okay, so for someone who is dating and not married yet, do you have any
Yes,
tips?
I do. I do. My biggest tip is to clarify what you want. So if you want a conscious partnership or what you want, really it could be so many different things. But if you want to feel cherished in a certain way, then be the woman who would be cherished. Don't
Mhm.
wait until you have a commitment from the person from someone you're dating. Don't wait until you're engaged or married to move through the world as someone having the experience that you want. I think this is very similar, in business. If you want to make your first million, you visualize and feel what would that be like when I have a seven-figure business, and kind of try to make decisions that are responsible for your current situation, but based on being someone who's building towards a seven-figure business. Likewise, when you're dating, interact with curiosity. It doesn't mean you date someone you don't want to date, or don't ask any question you don't actually want to hear the answer to, but be someone who's available and moves through the world worthy of being cherished. Don't wait for someone to give that to you. Does that
Mm.
speak to you?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah. So, okay, I'm gonna veer off like into, I guess, a topic that like some people get a little antsy, but we brought it up a few times. But how much do you think that your sex life affects other areas in life? So I did an episode once about like life buckets, and I think that some people feel like, okay, like this is just how it is. We've just reached this point in our relationship, but they're still trying to be successful in business. And how much do you think it affects all the different areas in life?
I think it has a huge effect. I would not say you need to have a fantastic sex life in order to be successful, especially because I think success is defined in so many different ways.
Mhm.
But people who are able to relax and ask for what they want, offer, give, and receive, pay attention to their own experience in bed as well as their partners, and find that amazing blend of focus on the other person, focus on oneself, focus on both simultaneously, and feel really gratified in doing that really works to smooth the way in success and in life. And in fact, I'm going to give a very specific example. I didn't think of it right when you asked, but when my husband and I were living in rural Kansas and we started doing some intentional sexual practices, obviously on our own in our bedroom behind a closed and locked door, he was practicing medicine at the time, and he used to get home at 6 o'clock. It was a very nice practice. That's getting home early for a doctor. And I noticed at some point, about 6 to 8 weeks after we started doing these sexual practices, that he was getting home 30, 45 minutes earlier every day. And I said to him, has something changed at work? Like, it's so great you're getting home earlier. Is your patient load lighter, or is there a new system that has the day end earlier? And he's like, no, nothing has changed. And we thought about it and we realized the only thing that had changed was that he and I had started doing these sexual practices, which had us intentional and able to connect much more deeply. And I believe that he became more efficient and skillful in connecting with people, so that when at the time was practicing family medicine, so when a patient came in, instead of it taking 15 minutes for the patient to feel heard and understood, or I don't know, 10 minutes, that as soon as the patient started speaking, my husband was present and listening for all the details. But feeling seen and heard does not have to do with how much information you've shared. It's an emotional experience of really dropping in and being received. and without any attention to it. And my husband is so professional and wouldn't have been connecting what was happening in our bedroom to how he was engaging with patients. In fact, I think he was so much more available for connection, and it meant everything was more efficient and felt better to everyone he was interacting with.
Mm, I love it. I love it. So I know my theories in my head
Yes.
that
Do you want to share any?
yeah, so I believe that, you know, if we suppress our desires, it definitely causes suppression in other areas of life. And like you said, connection is huge. And I also believe in energy and vibration. So, you know, when you all right, M&Ms, don't be shy, but when you have an orgasm, that's one of the highest vibrations. And so if you are really pleased in that area, you're going to vibrate at a higher frequency that's going to attract higher frequencies to you. And so you are going to be more present. You are going to be more connected. You are going to, you know, just shine a little brighter than if you weren't. So that's my theory.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I think that when we ourselves are feeling turned on
Mhm.
and pleasured and nourished and in alignment with our desires, that that makes for more connection, creativity,
Mhm.
efficiency, where efficiency is something valuable. It just opens up more opportunities because it creates more magnetism. So I think what we can talk about this in terms of the vibration, we can talk about it in terms of being attractive and magnetic. We can talk about it in a lot of different ways. And really, this is the very familiar principle of how you do anything is how you do everything.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean moving through the world available for sex, but having sexual energy makes you more available for all the other things that you want to create.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference, and I don't know. So, not to get too much into semantics, but like sex and intimacy is different. There's a lot of people that just have sex, but like true intimacy where you are vulnerable, you are connecting, you are concerned about the other person and truly connecting with the other person. I think there's a difference. There's definitely a
There's a
difference.
huge difference. And I usually talk about emotional intimacy to
Mhm.
distinguish it because some people aren't sure which kind of intimacy or they just assume it's sex. And I really love the use of the word erotic
Mm.
because erotic includes the emotional intimacy, the sensual intimacy. It can include sex, of course, but erotic energy can also be very high with two people close, not touching one another, not even looking at one another. And um, I really, really agree with what you've said.
Mm. Awesome. Okay, so to wrap it up, what are your three top tips for living an abundant life?
My first top tip is to do whatever you need to do to connect with being worthy of living an abundant life.
Mm.
And the second one is to be really clear what an abundant life means for you now and what an abundant life means for you in the future, and to move towards both so you can be gratified now even as you move through towards your big dreams. And I believe an abundant life includes being generous to others. And that can mean financially generous. It can mean having a big smile. It can mean listening to someone who isn't listened to. It can mean all kinds of different things. But I think an abundant life, by definition, includes a lot of generosity.
Mm. Give us one tip for a conscious, abundant relationship.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay. So I think what I want to say about abundance in relationship really is that it's possible. And as mammals, we learn through imitation. And one of the really big problems is that we don't have many relationships worth modeling. So
Mm.
I want to offer my book, which one of the main reasons that I wrote it is to both tell people the abundance that's possible and give a roadmap for creating it. So anyone who's interested, again, it's Uncompromising Intimacy, because to access abundance in relationship really means creating it as a pioneer, because it's not modeled for us.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so where can people find your book?
It's on Amazon. It's available. The Kindle version is available now, and the print version will be available January 14th.
So exciting.
Uncompromising Intimacy, and the subtitle is Turn Your Unfulfilling Marriage into a Deeply Passionate Partnership.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So I will have the link for her book in the show notes. And do you have a Facebook? Like, where can people find you online?
Absolutely. Alexandra Stockwell, MD, on Facebook. My website is alexandrastockwell.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and I put a lot out, mostly on Facebook, a little bit on Instagram, and I'd love to connect. So, anyone listening, tell me your observations, questions, dreams, desires. I'd love to engage.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad we finally got a chance to chat. M&Ms, if you enjoyed this bonus episode, you definitely want to tune into episode number 109, where I do an even deeper dive into conscious relationships with Alexandra Stockwell. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for tuning in to the Abundance Hack Show. I would love to hear from you. Leave your comments and questions, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our yummy episodes. Every time you leave a 5-star rating or review, I do my happy dance.